Hello everyone. Today we continue reading Robert Spalding's book, Stealth War. Robert Spalding retired from the U.S. Air Force as a brigadier general after more than 26 years of service. He completed his career as the senior director for the strategic planning to the president at the National Security Council and was the chief architect for the national security strategy. He is a former China strategist for the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff and Joint Staff at the Pentagon, as well as a senior defense official and a defense attaché to China. He earned his doctorate in economics and mathematics from the University of Missouri and is fluent in Mandarin. Stealth War, Chapter 3, Economy. Subtitle: Capitalism with Totalitarian Characteristics. In a sense, the CCP has taken its cue from the United States' success. Our country's robust economy has continually aided our growth. America's higher education system, our scientific and technological breakthroughs, our banking system, and our investment instruments have helped build us into a world power. We unshackled competitive forces in the economy while ensuring by rule of law that the outcome of those forces aligned with democratic principles. This, combined with our nation's natural resources, created a vibrant, dynamic, innovative, and financially successful nation. The Chinese Communist Party has basically patented its structure on this concept. Money changes everything, with a number of twists to the formula. It dispenses with rule of law, shed any idea of democracy, and focus all outcomes on the strengthening of a totalitarian state. It aligned private profit motive with the national interest. The totalitarian state of China drives all business with the idea of serving the goals of the CCP. That is the basic tenet. The party leadership operates from a very focused, tactical, goal-oriented model. It asks, what do we value? What are our goals? And how do we incentivize our citizens and the rest of the world to do the things that we want? Those italics are there for a reason. Influencing other governments and organizations is the key weapon in unrestricted warfare. The early leadership of the CCP, like that of the USSR, tried to control production on a granular, individual level, such as dictating worker outputs and which factory would make specific products. But Deng Xiaoping realized that what drives individual incentive is the profit motive, making money. Since the CCP controls all monetary policy and access to funds, and also controls the legal structure, it puts itself in a position to control all aspects of the economy. It can and does disburse funds. It can and does underwrite entire businesses. It can pass and has passed a law that says every Chinese company must have a CCP committee operating on premises. It can also banish regulations, and that is just what it has done. On a certain level, the CCP created one of the most laissez-faire, that's French for, basically, do whatever you want, environments for manufacturing and businesses. There are no environmental standards. There is no government agency ensuring that products are safe. There is no Better Business Bureau or Bureau of Consumer Protection. The lack of such restrictions and safeguards can make it seem as if unbridled, no holds barred capitalism has been unleashed. Stealing corporate secrets, piracy, theft of intellectual property, copyright violations, none of these are a problem in China. This is unrestricted warfare applied to global commerce and trade. The fact is, competition among Chinese is often dog-eat-dog, but only as long as the CCP wants it that way. So that laissez-faire environment that investors and manufacturers love, it can turn on a dime because there is regulation in China. Lots of it. Actually, all of it since the CCP, by actually choosing not to regulate some sectors, determines what is laissez-faire and what is not. The fact is, China is a closed economy. Sure, foreign companies can set up shop in China if they have a Chinese partner and if that partner has a CCP committee in place to monitor the business. As for foreign investments, once money comes in, it has to stay in China. And when it comes to operating a business in China, like Starbucks or McDonald's, theoretically, at least, all the money it earns must stay in China to either sit in banks or be reinvested. The same rules apply to every company that established a business, that is, establishing operations to sell goods or services in China. Why is this foreign investment rule a theory? Because if the right entity applies the right pressure to the CCP, the government will allow some earnings to be sent out of the country. But that is the quiet and reluctant exemption, not a rule. Meanwhile, foreign companies that want to enter the Chinese market, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and many others, are banned by the CCP. This site allows for free expression. They permit posts and videos about religion, operation in Tibet, the imprisonment of China's Muslim Uyghur population, and beauty of the U.S. Bill of Rights. All those things are forbidden in China, so those companies are not allowed to operate there unless they censor users. This restriction also points to a complete imbalance of trade. China has launched a number of giant, hugely successful knockoffs of Google, YouTube, and Facebook, Baidu, Youku, and Weibo, to name a few. All these sites are available in the United States and around most of the world, where they are monitored by the CCP, but in China, they flourish without American competition. And for the Chinese unit of money, the yuan, it is not traders on the foreign exchange market who dictate how much it is worth, which is how every other currency in the world is valued, but the Chinese government. The concept of ownership in China is also fungible, as we'll explore when we delve into China's obsessive acquisition of technology. Assets from one company can be transferred to another in the blink of an eye. And if you had a stake in a company that lost those assets, guess what? Too bad. The CCP gives and the CCP taken away. The free market myth. China is predatory and destructive when it comes to the economics of other countries. Countries, in fact, from which Chinese firms generate profits. Ironically, when critics note that China is not playing fair and make suggestions to force Beijing to play by the same rules everyone else abides by, China apologists launch into a familiar generously refrain. That won't destroy the free market system. This won't be funny if Warren is so outrageously hypercritical. There is no such thing as a free market as long as the second biggest economy in the world doesn't actually believe in free markets. There is endless evidence that the CCP is dead set against them. There is no free market when a dominant force restricts access, restricts cash flow, and restricts the free flow of ideas. China invests in an estimated 20% of U.S. startups as part of its Made in China 2025 plan, unveiled in 2017, which calls for the country to dominate emerging and traditional industries, including new materials, artificial intelligence, integrated circuits, biopharmaceuticals, 5G communications, aircraft manufacture, robots, electric cars, rail equipment, ships, and agricultural machinery. If the plan succeeds, China will not only stop buying from our companies like Boeing, General Electric, and Intel, it will compete with them in global markets. Despite this, American investor momentum continues to roll along. In 2019, Morgan Stanley Capital International, a leading index of global stock markets, added a slew of Chinese firms to its coverage. 20% of the index consists of Chinese companies listed on the Shanghai and Shenzhen exchanges. That means that institutional investors and others who use the index as a guide are currently pouring money into those Chinese companies, adding as much as $1 trillion to their valuation within a year. Given everything we knew about China's restrictive monetary policy and the cooked book practice, the fact that so many financial industry leaders are advocating on behalf of a totalitarian juggernaut suggests a number of possibilities. These people aren't paying attention. They are uninformed, which doesn't seem likely since they all have Bloomberg terminals, or they have been swayed by the profits they've reaped and the insidious propaganda of the CCP, which erroneously portrays the country as a responsible free trade playland. The other inexplicable refrain many captains of commerce recite is that the free market system is self-regulating. This theory holds that free markets are extremely efficient and that market forces ensure that the business community will always do what's best for itself. This, too, is a false construct and borderline ridiculous. First, as we just demonstrate, with China in the game, there are no free markets. Second, determining the best outcome is a dubious proposition. What is best and for whom? Are quick profits the best result? Or are long-term gains the smarter play? Or is constant liquidity, having in convertible cash? What do you mean? What do you want? For the past 30 years, the U.S. business community, the investment houses, the Fortune 500 companies, the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, pension fund managers, has allied itself in innumerable ways with the CCP, often against its own long-term best interests. Before we zoom in on the specifics of how the CCP has harnessed its ability to consolidate power in finance, investment, and trade markets to become the most predatory, imperialist economic force on the planet, let's make one more big picture point about how business, wealth, and prosperity has worked in the United States. It provides a striking contrast to the CCP's machinations. When Vanderbilt built railroads, when Carnegie built steel mills, when Ford built cars, when Rockefeller dug oil wells, and when IBM built computers, the government didn't back these entities. Banks did. Investors did. The stock market did. As businesses flourished, the economy expanded, technology and housing improved, and the standard of living increased. It was a free market. There was no government plan, although some companies may have received government contracts and tax breaks, and some cynical politicians profited from campaign donations and stock tips. And yes, business may have influenced friendly legislation, but business did not serve as a government beck and call. In fact, things were often the other way around, with governments building roads, water systems, and other infrastructure to allow business to thrive. But government didn't say what its citizens built. It supported, in essence, a free market. China is a total Ponzi scheme. One of the baffling things about China's rise is how the country has achieved the most mind-boggling growth in the history of the world. There is no other single turnaround like it in modern history. How has it been possible to move so many out of poverty so quickly? It is a long and complicated story, and one of the subplots of this book, but here is the one-sentence summary from an economic perspective. They did it by issuing and obtaining massive amounts of credit, by generating billions in foreign investment that remains unrecoverable, and by creating a walled, closed economic system that remains unaccountable to outside audits and fleeces foreign investors. China is a paper tiger, says Stephen Bannon, discussing the country's economic growth. Then the former Goldman Sachs VP told me, China is a total Ponzi scheme. The only question we have in China, the only important question, is the economic implosion. How bad will it drag down everybody? Bannon has a strong case. Imagine if Ponzi scheme king Bernie Madoff, who bilked investors out of billions of dollars for years, had been able indefinitely to tell his marks, "No, you can't take your money out until I say so," and "No, you can only see the financial report that I want you to see." Then imagine if Bernie had been able also indefinitely to tell the Department of Justice, the SEC, and IRS, "No, you can't look at my books. You have to trust my accounting." If those conditions existed in the United States, Madoff would likely still be fleecing his marks, creating profits out of thin air by luring new client cash, taking a cut for himself, and then slowly paying off previous clients. Those conditions basically describe the rules that China has used to fuel its explosive growth, running a Ponzi scheme on a global scale. Foreign investment comes in, but it stays in China. Some of it remains in dollars, so China has continued to trade internationally, but profits remain in non-convertible currency and subject to strict capital controls. Chinese companies, many of which are subsidized by the CCP or used as piggy banks by CCP power brokers, do not follow traditional accounting practice. Therefore, analysts have no way of accurately judging the true physical health of Chinese companies, which have a further buffer in that the government-owned Bank of China injects cash into whatever company it seems strategically important. And since, as we will document in the technology section, the CCP can take assets from one company and instantly assign them to a different company, the idea of regulated bookkeeping is nothing more than a fantasy. Given all this, the West's rush to invest in China's markets is at best reckless and at worst insane. So why is it happening? Apparently, Wall Street is too high on profits it reaps on transaction fees for every trade to care, and pension fund managers are too smitten by group thinking investing, the idea that if everyone is doing it, we will too. They are not alone. The wisdom, or in this case, folly of crowds is a very powerful force. To shape that wisdom, China engages in a form of media warfare, propaganda and influencing campaigns. The CCP's battle to present foreign investment as safe takes place on many fronts. It woos investors and journalists, welcomes trade missions, and sponsors junkets. It buys official-looking advertorial inserts and places them in respected newspapers, such as the Washington Post. China Global Television Network has offered jobs to journalists around the world who had been critical of China's practice, such as deforestation in Africa, in an effort to control the narrative. One reporter, according to The Guardian, turned down an offer that would have doubled his salary. All of this is a part of unrestricted warfare, a calculated charm and misinformation offensive designed to build trust and investment. And let's give the CCP and its propaganda wing credit. They are doing a brilliant job. They are pulling off arguably the biggest con in the world. In November 2018, Chinese President Xi addressed the Spanish Senate, furthering the charade. China will make efforts to open even more its doors to the exterior world, and we will make efforts to streamline access to markets in areas of investment and protect intellectual property. He offered no timeline, no detail for increased investment access, including whether that alluded to easing divestment rules, and zero on how China would enforce IP protections. It was nothing more than, trust me. Part of China's Ponzi success is built on corporate complicity and silence in the West. When companies that have invested heavily in China discover they can't get their money out of the country, and there are literally thousands of these firms out there, what can they do? As soon as they put money in, they find themselves between a rock and a very hard place. That money is trapped. This is a constant refrain whispered by corporate leaders in high places. According to well-placed finance experts, companies such as Chevron, Exxon, Sony, and BMW have billions of dollars in earnings in China, but they can't repatriate their money. China refuses to let it leave the country because it needs those dollars. Numerous investment community sources have told me that, as far as they know, China has not allowed significant repatriation of any Western investor funds since 2015. If they are going to grow their economy, they have to grow their reserves because they have to trade more with the rest of the world based upon that growth. Kyle Buss, the founder of the Heyman Capital Management, told me in January 2019, so China could keep this charade going as long as they maintain the positive current account balance. For example, more money coming in net than was going out. For the past 17 years, China generated substantial positive current account balances. Now, for the first time since 2001, they are going to record a negative current account for 2018. The National Bureau of Statistics of China, NBS, released numbers for 2018 that show the slowest GDP growth in 28 years to 6.6%. Given the Bureau's lack of transparency into the various sectors of Chinese economy, many financial analysts suspect that these numbers are based on cooked books. As Bass noted in an editorial a few weeks after the NBS numbers were released, the last 12 months have seen key Chinese economic indicators such as industrial production, car sales, retail sales, and investment all decline to multi-year lows as the previous round of stimulus abated and China's debt burden continued to cause a downward economic spiral. At any rate, a negative or declining balance, the result of slowing trade and investment, suggests that two fundamentally contradictory things will happen in short term. First, China will try to generate more foreign investment to sustain its growth. Second, China will not release any profits on that foreign investment, despite that being the obvious point of investment, because it needs every American cent it can muster to pay for its growth. If it looks like a Ponzi scheme and acts like a Ponzi scheme, but denies it's a Ponzi scheme, what is it? China. And people who invest in it, they are either co-conspirators or victims, of course. Common co-conspirators have other terms for victims. They call them marks or suckers. Another dazzling differences between China's finance market and Western markets, which again underscore the lack of free trade that exists in Beijing and the manipulative Ponzi scheme nature of the beast, involves China's habit of selective regulation. In the United States, if IBM issue a bond on the capital markets, that money goes to IBM, and investors should have a good deal of confidence that money raised will be spent to improve the company. After all, there's a board of directors and a CEO who have fiduciary responsibilities to make sure the company hits its goals. In China, incoming investment goes where the CCP wants it to go. Again, something we will examine in greater detail when delving into China's technology obsessions. Fitting China's Ponzi scheme with American investment creates triple-edged risks. 2. The financial industry is not just funding the growth of the United States' #1 totalitarian adversary and risking losing those funds by turning them into non-convertible capital. It is also drying up valuable investment dollars in the U.S. and other markets. If your pension funds has dollars tied up in China that it can't access, those funds can be reinvested in rebuilding America's crumbling infrastructure, financing its cutting-edge startups, or supporting restarted manufacturing efforts. Wall Street profits may grow temporarily, but America stagnates. As the founder of a hedge fund focused on making event-based global investment, Kyle Bass devotes a good deal of time to studying China's balance sheet. He confirms Bannon's take on the subject of China's instability. In our early January 2019 talk, Bass deconstructed China's numbers and described a closed economic system that is perilously over-leveraged in ways that make the United States seem like a bastion of responsible, tight-fisted fiscal policy. Curiously, China's credit strategy runs counter to all of the CCP's typical long-term strategy planning, according to Bass. But perhaps this makes sense when you consider that the country has needed quick cash to aggressively implement elements of its long game. The way that they have achieved relative stability on their home turf is they have expanded their central bank balance sheet and printed more yuan than any one country has ever printed currency in the history of man, said Bass. When Bass compared the fiscal realities that precipitated the 2008 U.S. market collapse to the current state of China's finances, he shuddered. Going into the financial crisis, he said, the U.S. had 17 trillion of GDP and about 1.3 times the GDP in banking assets, and we had about $1 trillion of banking equity. When you look at China today, it has a banking system that has $50 trillion worth of yuan, $2 trillion of banking equity, and an economy GDP of $13 trillion. Bass is basing his numbers on data from the People's Bank of China, the nation's central bank, and other agencies, and he included such assets as wealth management products, trust beneficiary rights, and trust loans. He estimates China's total credit at $48 trillion, nearly 4 times its gross domestic product. By comparison, the United States held about $24 trillion in credit in 2019, but its economy was 37% larger than China's. In other words, China has 3 times the amount of money in circulation than the United States did, while generating $4 trillion less in GDP. Even with double the banking equity of the United States, a result of positive returns from 2001 to 2015, those are terrifying ratios. Economic theory and the laws of supply and demand hold that printing massive amounts of money should automatically lead to significant inflation. But so far, China has avoided devaluation by refusing to participate in the foreign exchange market. Meanwhile, the CCP controls markets. It also controls the media, ensuring that there will be no stories about shortage or inflation or housing bubbles. But it controls social credit scores, a newly installed system of tracking its citizens' behavior using facial recognition and data surveillance to monitor whether individuals are complying with CCP-mandated laws, which exist as a way to control and reward the population. Together, then, the country's closed economic system and the totalitarian repression work to artificially prevent inflation and enforce stability.